My stepbrother borrowed Dad's car without permission, totaled it, and tried to blame me. When I confronted him, he smirked and said, "You always play the victim. You can't even admit when you screw up." I just walked away. That was 2 weeks ago. Last night, he was crying in his car, begging for help. My stepbrother crashed my dad's car, then tried to put all the blame on me. I made sure he paid for every cent. Ever since my dad married my stepmom, her son Kyle has been a constant problem in my life. He's a year older than me, but from day one, he acted like he was the boss of the house. When I was 10 and he was 11, he'd hide my school shoes before the bus came and then say, "You should be more organized," while laughing as I got in trouble for being late. If I had friends over, he'd butt in and embarrass me, telling them I still slept with a nightlight. When we were teenagers, he made my life miserable. He'd eat my packed lunch and then say, "What? You're lucky I'm even keeping you from getting fat." He accidentally spilled juice on my homework twice and told my dad I was lying about it. And the worst part? He was good at acting innocent. He'd twist things around so that I looked like the troublemaker. One time I saved up for months to buy a guitar. 2 days later, it was gone. Kyle said he borrowed it to show a friend but never got it back. He told my dad I was being selfish for not wanting to share, and somehow I ended up grounded for overreacting. It was always like this. He'd do something awful, then convince everyone I was at fault. By the time we were adults, we barely spoke unless we had to. But last year, my dad bought himself a used car he was really proud of. It wasn't brand new or fancy, but it was clean, reliable, and something he had worked hard to afford. Dad loved that car and took good care of it. One weekend, Dad went on a short business trip. Kyle asked me if I wanted to hang out, which was suspicious since he never invited me anywhere. I declined, but the next day, I saw him driving past my friend's house in Dad's car. I texted him asking why he had it, and he replied, "Chill, Dad said it was fine. Something about it didn't sit right, so I called Dad." Turns out Dad had no idea Kyle had the keys. Later that night, I saw Kyle again, this time speeding down our street in the same car, music blaring, with 2 of his buddies hanging out the windows. The next morning, the car was gone from the driveway. A couple hours later, Kyle came home acting nervous. That afternoon, Dad called me asking what happened to his car. I told him I didn't know, and that's when he said the police had called. The car had been found wrecked on the side of the road, totaled. Kyle immediately jumped in, saying, "It wasn't me. I saw Daniel driving it last night with her friends." I laughed in disbelief, thinking Dad wouldn't believe something so ridiculous. But Kyle kept going, acting like he was concerned. I told her not to take it, but she wouldn't listen. She even smelled like she'd been drinking. He made it sound so real, like he was worried for my safety. Dad went quiet. I could see he wasn't sure who to believe. When I tried to defend myself, Kyle smirked and said, "You always play the victim. You can't even admit when you screw up." That line made my blood boil. I reminded Dad that I had been home all night, but Kyle cut me off with, "Sure, now you remember where you were." He even suggested Dad should teach me responsibility by making me pay for the damages. Dad didn't outright accuse me, but I could tell he was leaning toward believing Kyle. That hurt more than anything. I realized I wasn't going to clear my name with words. I needed proof, so I started asking around. One of my friends mentioned seeing Kyle's Instagram story the night before, the one he deleted. I asked if they'd saved it. They had. In the video, Kyle was in the driver's seat of Dad's car, bragging about taking it for a spin and yelling, "Hope my old man doesn't find out." There was even a clip of him trying to drift in an empty parking lot. I saved everything and showed Dad. His face fell. Kyle tried to spin it again, saying, "It's just a joke. We weren't really driving like that." But it was obvious from the smashed up car that the video wasn't a joke. Here's where I decided talking wasn't enough. I knew Kyle had no money to pay Dad back, but I also knew he had recently taken out a car loan for his own vehicle. So I called his finance company, pretending to be him, and confirmed his employment at the job he had just been fired from 2 weeks earlier. Without income, his payments bounced, and within a month, the repo truck came and took his car away. At the same time, I made sure Dad filed a police report with the video evidence. Kyle ended up having to pay the insurance company back for the damages, which wiped out the little savings he had. And because word got around about what happened, his friends stopped trusting him too. Apparently, stealing from family isn't a good look. The day the tow truck took his car, I was sitting on the porch. He stormed up to me and yelled, "This is your fault." I just smiled and said, "Actions have consequences, Kyle." He sputtered something about me being petty and walked off. He glared at me for a long moment, then smirked. "Yeah, they do." That night, I barely slept, watching from my bedroom window as Kyle paced around the backyard for hours. He kicked over Dad's lawn chairs and threw a flower pot against the fence while screaming into his phone about needing money right now. Dad sat at the kitchen table below me with insurance papers spread everywhere, looking up every few minutes when Kyle's voice got louder. The way Kyle kept clenching and unclenching his fists made my stomach twist because I knew this wasn't over. Next morning at breakfast, Linda kept making excuses while Dad just stared at his eggs. She said the stress was getting to everyone, and maybe we should all try to be more understanding. Kyle's chair stayed empty, but his jacket hung by the door, and I watched Linda slip 3 20s from her purse into the pocket when she thought nobody was looking. Later that day, my phone buzzed with texts from Marcus. He'd found more of Kyle's deleted Instagram stories from 2 weeks before the crash, screenshots showing Kyle behind the wheel of Dad's car at least 4 different times. One video had him laughing about how Dad never noticed the missing gas money. The timestamp on another showed Kyle driving Dad's car the exact same day he got fired from the warehouse, hours before he'd told everyone he was at work. I saved everything to 3 different cloud accounts and emailed copies to myself because Kyle had destroyed evidence before. 2 days passed before things got worse. I went to the garage to get a rake, and Kyle appeared out of nowhere, grabbing my arm so hard his fingers left marks. His breath reeked of beer, even though it was barely 10 in the morning. He got right in my face and said I thought I was so smart with that video, but he knew stuff about me too, like when I snuck out junior year to go to that party. I pulled away hard and noticed the security camera I'd installed last month had caught everything, including him stumbling when I broke free. Officer Hayes showed up that afternoon to take my statement about the accident. Kyle kept interrupting with different versions of what happened, first saying he wasn't even there, then claiming he saw me take the keys, then changing it to say he tried to stop me from leaving. The officer wrote everything down while her eyebrows kept going up higher with each new version Kyle told. When we finished, I sat in my car outside the police station with shaking hands as I forwarded the garage assault video to Officer Hayes. Through my rearview mirror, I spotted Kyle's friend Jake watching me from across the parking lot, just standing there by his truck. Instead of going home, I drove straight to Marcus's house and stayed there until dark. The next day, Tom Briggs called Dad about scheduling an insurance interview with the whole family. Linda immediately started telling Kyle what to say, while Dad kept insisting everyone should just tell the truth. I stood in the hallway recording on my phone as Linda actually said Kyle should stick to the story about me drinking that night. 3 days later, during the actual interview, Kyle pulled out a receipt from a liquor store with the timestamp from the accident night. He claimed I bought vodka, but I stayed calm and showed Tom my work time card proving I was at the restaurant until 11, plus security footage my manager had given me. Tom looked at the receipt and asked Kyle why he had a receipt for something I supposedly bought, and Kyle's face went red. A week after that, Jessica Torres messaged me on Facebook saying she had information about Kyle but was scared. We met at a coffee shop downtown where she showed me police reports from when they dated, reports she never filed because Linda had begged her not to ruin Kyle's future. Jessica's hands shook as she explained how Kyle stole her credit cards 3 times and took her car without asking constantly. That evening, Dad found me in my room organizing everything into folders with labels for each date and incident. He sat on my bed and asked why I didn't come to him first. I pulled up 3 years of text messages on my phone, messages where I'd tried telling him about Kyle's behavior, but he'd always said I was overreacting or that siblings fight sometimes. Dad's face just crumbled as he scrolled through message after message, seeing all the times he'd dismissed my concerns or told me to work it out myself. A week later, I was at work when my phone started blowing up with texts from Linda. She was screaming in all caps about how I'd ruined Kyle's life because the repo truck had just taken his car from her client's driveway while she was showing a house. The driver had told her Kyle lied about having a job on his loan papers, which was apparently a felony. She called Dad right after, and I could hear her yelling through his phone from across the house when I got home, demanding he kick me out for destroying her son. Dad just hung up on her. 2 days after that, I came home from my shift to find my bedroom door hanging off its hinges. My clothes were thrown everywhere, drawers pulled out, mattress flipped over, and my laptop was in pieces on the floor. Kyle was passed out drunk on my bare bed frame, reeking of beer and sweat. I called Dad immediately, and he called the cops while I took pictures of everything. Marcus had helped me hide backup drives in the attic and set up a hidden camera in my room the week before, so everything Kyle did while tearing my room apart was recorded. The next morning, Officer Hayes sat at our kitchen table reviewing the footage on Dad's laptop while I made coffee with shaking hands. Kyle stumbled downstairs around 10, saw the uniform, and immediately started yelling that I'd planted evidence to frame him. Officer Hayes stood up and told him he was being charged with destruction of property and needed to come to the station. Linda pulled into the driveway just as Kyle was being put in the back of the patrol car, and she started screaming at everyone. Marcus came over that afternoon with a new laptop he'd bought for me and helped me recover everything from the cloud backups we'd set up. While installing security software, he found login attempts on my bank accounts from Kyle's IP address using password variations of my birthday and pet names. I changed every password I had and added 2-factor authentication to everything. 3 days later, I was grabbing groceries when Linda's SUV screeched to a stop behind my car, blocking me in completely. She jumped out waving papers and screaming that I wasn't even Robert's real daughter and had no right to destroy Kyle's life over a stupid car. She threw what looked like legal documents at me through my window, saying her lawyer friend was going to sue me for everything. I stayed calm, took photos of the papers and her license plate blocking me, then called 911 to report harassment. She drove off before the cops arrived, but they took my statement anyway. That same week, Tom called Dad with his findings about the car. The damage patterns matched the parking lot from Kyle's Instagram videos perfectly, not the street where Kyle claimed the accident happened. The insurance company was now pursuing fraud charges. Dad sat at the kitchen table with his head in his hands while we could hear Linda upstairs throwing things into suitcases. I started sleeping with a doorstop alarm wedged under my bedroom door and my car keys under my pillow. Every noise in the house made me jump, and I checked the locks constantly. I parked my car at different neighbors' houses each night because I didn't trust Kyle not to do something to it. The exhaustion was killing me, but I couldn't let my guard down. Jessica reached out to me on Facebook saying she had something important to show me. She sent screenshots of old texts where Kyle bragged about taking Dad's car multiple times, calling it payback for his mom marrying someone else. One message from the night of the crash said, "Just fucked up big time with the car, gonna blame it on my stepsister, lol," with laughing emojis. Jessica said she'd give a statement to the police if I needed it. 4 days later, I was carrying plates during the dinner rush when Kyle burst through the restaurant doors, drunk and yelling. He started telling customers I was a lying manipulator who destroyed families, that I'd ruined his life over nothing. My manager tried to get him to leave, but Kyle kept screaming that I'd pay for this, that I'd regret messing with him. Security had to physically drag him out, while 3 of my co-workers recorded everything on their phones. I sent all the videos to Officer Hayes that night. Around 2 in the morning, I found Dad sitting alone at the kitchen table with a cup of cold coffee. He looked older than I'd ever seen him, and when I sat down, he pushed a stack of papers toward me. They were divorce papers Linda had left him. His hands shook as he told me he was sorry, that he'd wanted so badly for our blended family to work, that he refused to see what was happening right in front of him. He said he should have protected me from day one, instead of always telling me to be the bigger person, or to work things out myself. We sat there holding hands in the dark kitchen, neither of us saying anything about the 13 years of Kyle's lies and Linda's enabling that had finally torn everything apart. The next morning, my phone rang at 7:30, and Officer Hayes told me Kyle had been arrested for fraud, filing a false police report, and harassment. His bail was set at $10,000. Within 3 hours, Linda had drained her savings account and bailed him out. Dad found out from a neighbor who saw them loading boxes into Linda's car that afternoon. They were moving to Linda's sister's place across town. Dad went straight to the hardware store and bought new locks for every door in the house. He changed them all before dinner, while I helped hold the doors steady. Marcus came over that evening with empty banker's boxes, and we started organizing all the evidence we'd collected over the years. Old photos of my broken guitar, screenshots of Kyle's deleted posts, copies of police reports, witness statements from Jessica and others. It filled 2 boxes completely. Marcus had made a detailed timeline on his laptop showing every incident from the past 13 years. He looked at the stacks of paper and shook his head. We made copies of everything, and Marcus took the duplicates to store at his house just in case. 3 days later, Tom called Dad to tell him the insurance company was pursuing criminal charges against Kyle for fraud since the claim amount exceeded $15,000. If convicted, Kyle could face up to 5 years in prison. Dad sat at the kitchen table staring at the phone after the call ended. I could see him struggling with the idea of Kyle actually going to jail. I reminded him that Kyle made these choices himself, and Dad nodded, but still looked torn. A week passed quietly until I stopped at the gas station near work to fill up my tank. Kyle appeared beside my car while I was pumping gas. He grabbed my arm and hissed that I needed to drop the charges or I'd regret it. He didn't notice the security cameras pointing right at us or the off-duty cop filling up at the next pump who immediately walked over. The officer called for backup while Kyle tried to explain he was just talking to me. 2 patrol cars arrived within minutes, and they arrested Kyle for violating his bail conditions. This time, the judge held him without bail. Even with Kyle locked up, I couldn't relax. Every time my phone rang, I jumped. I checked my rearview mirror constantly while driving. I kept feeling like something bad was about to happen. Linda had started posting on Facebook about her persecuted son and how he was being framed. Kyle's friends were sharing her posts and adding threatening comments about what should happen to snitches. I screenshot everything and sent it to Officer Hayes. 2 days later, Dad got a formal letter from Linda's lawyer demanding $50,000 for Kyle's emotional distress and defamation. Dad actually laughed when he read it out loud. Dad's own lawyer told him to document everything but not respond directly, since Linda was clearly just trying to get money for Kyle's defense. That same afternoon, Jessica called me crying. Kyle's friends had found her Instagram and were sending her threats for giving a statement to the police. I drove to her apartment, and we spent 2 hours taking screenshots of every message and comment. Officer Hayes said this would help strengthen the case against Kyle's whole network of enablers. She helped Jessica file harassment reports against 3 of Kyle's friends. 3 days later, we all had to go to court for Kyle's bail hearing. Linda took the stand and told the judge I had been orchestrating a campaign against her son since we were children. My lawyer presented 13 years of documentation showing the exact opposite pattern. The judge reviewed everything, including 2 incidents Jessica had reported that Kyle had threatened her not to tell anyone about. After an hour of testimony, the judge denied bail. Linda screamed at me in the courthouse hallway until 2 bailiffs had to physically escort her outside. Tom called Dad the next day with shocking news. He'd been digging into Kyle's history and found 3 previous insurance claims in other states under slightly different versions of his name. Each one involved a borrowed or rented car that got wrecked, and each time Kyle blamed someone else for the damage. The Federal Insurance Fraud Department was opening an investigation. Because of the fraud, Dad's insurance company called to say they would fully cover his car after all, since Kyle's involvement voided the original claim denial. I tried to go back to work, but couldn't focus on anything. Every few minutes, I checked my phone for updates from Officer Hayes or our lawyer or Dad. Customers would ask me questions, and I'd forget what they said immediately. My manager noticed me staring at nothing and suggested I take a few days off to deal with everything. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I realized I'd been holding my breath for weeks, waiting for Kyle's next move, even though he was behind bars. 4 days later, Marcus texted me that he'd found something weird online. He'd been browsing his usual gaming forum when he spotted Kyle's username posting stuff about my daily schedule. The posts had details about when I left for work, which grocery store I used, even which parking spots I picked. Marcus took screenshots of everything and sent them to Officer Hayes right away. She called me within an hour, asking if I could come to the station. When I got there, she showed me printouts of Kyle's posts, plus messages to his friends, telling them to make Daniel's life hell. Turns out Kyle had been using a smuggled phone in jail to coordinate harassment against me. Officer Hayes said they were launching an immediate investigation into how he got the phone and who was helping him. The next afternoon, I went grocery shopping at my usual store on Main Street. I was picking out apples when I noticed this guy following me, Kyle's friend Jake from high school. He stayed about 10 10 feet behind me, but followed me down every aisle, muttering stuff under his breath. I pulled out my phone and pretended to text while secretly recording audio. Jake got closer in the cereal aisle, and I heard him say he'd make me pay for what I did to Kyle. My hands were shaking, but I kept recording and walked toward the customer service desk. The security guard saw me looking scared and asked if I was okay. I showed him Jake still following me and explained what was happening. Security made Jake leave and banned him from the store permanently. That same evening, Dad told me he'd started seeing a therapist to deal with everything. He sat at the kitchen table with this old notebook full of stuff he'd been writing down. Page after page of memories that suddenly made sense. Times Kyle lied, and Linda covered for him. He showed me entries about when I'd tried to tell him things, but he didn't believe me. His voice cracked when he said he'd failed me, but promised he wouldn't anymore. We both cried a little, and I told him it wasn't his fault. A week passed before Officer Hayes called with big news. 3 more of Kyle's friends had been arrested for criminal harassment and conspiracy charges. The investigation into the contraband phone revealed a whole group chat where they'd planned to terrorize me until I dropped the charges. Federal investigators got involved because some of the harassment crossed state lines through social media. Officer Hayes said Kyle was looking at federal cyber harassment charges on top of everything else. That night, Dad and I had our first normal dinner in weeks without checking the locks or jumping at every sound. The house felt different without Kyle and Linda's constant drama and lies. Dad mentioned he'd been sleeping better, and I admitted I still checked the locks multiple times before bed. We decided to install a full security system with cameras and motion sensors just to feel safer. The next morning, Linda showed up at Dad's office with some guy I'd never seen before. Kyle's uncle, apparently. Dad's secretary heard Linda demanding that Dad pay for Kyle's defense attorney since it was family obligation. When Dad refused, the uncle started threatening to expose family secrets if Dad didn't give them money. The secretary quietly called building security while recording everything on her phone. The uncle's threats got more specific, saying Dad would regret not helping and that bad things might happen. Security arrived and escorted them out, but Dad filed a police report about the witness intimidation. 3 days after that, Tom, the insurance investigator, testified before a grand jury about Kyle's fraud patterns. His investigation uncovered over $75,000 in fraudulent claims across multiple states. The prosecutor added wire fraud and interstate commerce violations to Kyle's growing list of charges. Tom called me afterward to say Kyle could face up to 20 years if convicted on all counts. I couldn't believe how deep Kyle's crimes went beyond just the car situation. That night, I went to bed feeling like maybe things were finally turning around. At 3 in the morning, I woke up to glass breaking downstairs. Someone had thrown a brick through our living room window with a note tied to it. The note said, "Drop it or drop dead," in messy handwriting. Dad called 911 while I took pictures of everything with my phone. We spent the rest of the night at the police station giving statements and drinking bad coffee. Officer Hayes said she'd assign extra patrols to our street and helped me file for a protective order. The exhaustion was getting to both of us, but we weren't backing down. Jessica reached out to me a few days later saying she wanted to help with Kyle's trial. She brought a whole folder of receipts, bank statements, and photos from when Kyle had gotten physical with her. She told me about other women Kyle had dated who might have similar stories to share. We spent the afternoon carefully reaching out to them through social media. 2 more women agreed to provide statements about Kyle's pattern of abuse and stealing from them. 5 days after that, Kyle's lawyer filed a motion claiming I'd fabricated all the digital evidence using AI and deepfake technology. The judge ordered an independent forensic analysis of every video, photo, and timestamp we'd submitted. Marcus spent 2 days working with the court's IT specialist to verify the authenticity of everything. The analysis proved all our evidence was genuine, and the judge sanctioned Kyle's lawyer for wasting the court's time with frivolous motions. That same afternoon, Dad got a call from his bank about unusual activity on his investment account, and when he logged in, he found Linda had been selling off stocks left and right for the past month. The account that used to have over $40,000 was down to less than $8,000, and all the withdrawals went straight to a law firm representing Kyle. Dad called his lawyer immediately, and within 2 hours, they had an emergency court order freezing what was left, but the damage was already done. The forensic accountant Dad hired went through 5 years of records and found Linda had been skimming money the whole time, little amounts here and there that added up to over $70,000 total. Dad sat at the kitchen table with papers spread everywhere, his hands shaking as he added up all the times Linda said they couldn't afford things like my college textbooks or fixing the roof while she was secretly draining their savings. The next morning, I finally went to see the counselor my work offered through their employee assistance program, and for the first time, I told someone everything, starting from when I was 10 and Kyle would hide my shoes. The counselor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes, just listened as I talked about 13 years of Kyle making me look crazy, Linda backing him up, and Dad not seeing what was happening until now. She told me none of it was my fault, and that what I went through had a name, gaslighting, and that surviving it took incredible strength. I left her office feeling like someone had lifted a weight off my chest that I didn't even know I was carrying. 1 week later, the FBI showed up at Linda's sister's house with a search warrant and found boxes of Kyle and Linda's stuff in the garage, including Kyle's old laptop, stacks of credit cards that weren't in his name, and a notebook where he'd written out detailed plans to plant drugs in my car to discredit me as a witness. They arrested Linda right there for being an accessory after the fact, and Dad watched the whole thing on the news that night, his face going pale when the reporter mentioned federal charges for identity theft and conspiracy. Officer Hayes called me the next day with news that made my blood run cold. The jail had been recording Kyle's phone calls and caught him trying to arrange for someone to plant heroin in my car at work. The guy Kyle hired got arrested in my work parking lot with the drugs and a Slim Jim to break into my car, and when the cops searched him, they found Kyle's handwritten instructions and a promise of $5,000. I couldn't eat after that call, couldn't sleep, kept checking my car every time I went anywhere, jumping whenever someone walked too close. Marcus started sleeping on my couch because I was too scared to be alone, and Dad took time off work to stay home during the day when Marcus had to work. We were winning in court, but I felt like I was losing my mind, afraid to go to the grocery store, afraid to answer my door, wondering if sending Kyle to prison was worth living in constant fear. 3 days later, Tom from the insurance company showed up at my apartment to thank me personally, saying my evidence had helped them uncover a whole ring of insurance fraud involving 5 of Kyle's friends who'd been staging accidents for years. He mentioned the company wanted to give me a reward for preventing future fraud, but I just wanted everything to be over and only accepted when he said I could use it for therapy costs. That same week, Kyle's old boss from the warehouse called the prosecutor with security footage from the past 6 months, showing Kyle loading boxes of electronics into his car after hours, stealing at least $30,000 worth of inventory. The prosecutor added grand theft charges that could mean another 5 years in prison, and I felt a bitter satisfaction knowing I'd been right when I suspected Kyle was lying about getting fired for being late. Linda made bail 2 days later and immediately started calling Dad's work nonstop, leaving voicemails that went from crying and begging him to drop the charges to threatening to tell all his clients he was an abusive husband who abandoned his family. Dad's receptionist saved all the messages, and his lawyer filed for an emergency restraining order, while the prosecutor added witness tampering charges to Linda's case. The police arrested her again within 48 hours when she showed up at Dad's office building, despite the restraining order, screaming in the parking lot until security called the cops. 4 days after that, I finally went back to work full-time, grateful for the normal routine of stocking shelves and helping customers, even though my manager made sure I never worked alone and always had someone walk me to my car. Regular customers asked if I was okay, and my coworkers brought me lunch every day, and I realized the whole community had been watching out for me while I dealt with Kyle and Linda. The normalcy felt weird after months of chaos, like I was playing pretend at being a regular person who didn't have a stepbrother trying to destroy her life from jail. Then the prosecutor called with news about a plea deal, 8 years in prison if Kyle admitted to everything and agreed to pay back all the money he stole, but Kyle refused and demanded a trial where he planned to claim I'd set him up for everything. His lawyer tried to quit the case citing irreconcilable differences, but the judge wouldn't let him, saying Kyle had a right to representation even if he was being difficult, and set the trial date for 3 months out. The prosecutor came to our house that night for dinner to go over what would happen at trial. Dad made pasta while she spread papers across our kitchen table, showing us how Kyle's defense would work. She pointed to each document explaining that they'd try to make me look like a jealous stepsister who wanted Kyle gone from day one. Her finger moved down the list of every incident from the past 13 years that we'd have to talk about in court. Dad's hand found mine across the table and squeezed it when she mentioned the guitar and the car crash and all the other times Kyle had hurt me. The prosecutor left around 9, and Dad stayed up with me going through old photo albums, looking for pictures that showed bruises or damage Kyle had caused over the years. 1 week later, Jessica called me from her bank job crying because 3 guys had shown up trying to scare her into not testifying. She'd hit the panic button immediately, and security guards grabbed them while they were still yelling threats in the lobby. The cops arrested all 3 and found text messages on their phones from a number that traced back to Kyle's jail account. The prosecutor called me that afternoon saying this was exactly what she needed to prove Kyle was running a harassment ring from behind bars. Marcus came over the next day with boxes and labels to help me organize all the evidence for trial. We spent 8 hours sorting through 13 years of police reports and photos and text messages and witness statements. Each box got labeled by year, and we made copies of everything important. When we finished, there were 4 huge boxes sitting in my living room, and Marcus looked at them, shaking his head. He picked up a photo from when I was 12 with a black eye Kyle gave me and just stared at it. Dad and I started fixing up the house that weekend, pulling down all the pictures of Linda and Kyle from the walls. We painted Kyle's old room a light blue and donated his furniture to Goodwill. The broken window from when Kyle's friends threw rocks got replaced with thick safety glass that cost Dad extra but made us both feel safer. Every change we made helped the house feel like ours again, instead of a place where bad things kept happening. 2 weeks after that, the prosecutor called with news that made my stomach drop. They'd arrested 5 more people connected to Kyle's harassment campaign against multiple victims. Phone records showed Kyle had been calling and texting instructions to hurt people who'd crossed him going back years. There were 3 other women besides Jessica who'd filed restraining orders against him, and 2 guys from his old job who'd reported threats. The prosecutor said I was just his favorite target, but definitely not his only one. The pre-trial hearing was set for the following Monday, and I sat in the courtroom watching Kyle argue with his lawyer. Then he stood up and told the judge he wanted to represent himself because his lawyer wasn't aggressive enough. The judge spent 20 minutes trying to talk him out of it, but Kyle kept insisting he was the only one who could prove I was lying. The prosecutor pulled me aside after and warned me this meant Kyle would get to question me directly at trial. I spent the rest of that week meeting with Jessica and 2 other women Kyle Kyle had hurt over the years. We met at a coffee shop downtown, and Amy showed us screenshots of hundreds of texts Kyle sent her after she broke up with him. Brittany had photos of her car with the tires slashed and windows broken from when she'd refused to loan Kyle money. We exchanged phone numbers and made a group chat to support each other through the trial. 5 days later, Dad's lawyer called with good news about the divorce. The judge had frozen all of Linda's bank accounts and assets while they investigated the fraud charges. The forensic accountant's final report showed Linda had stolen over $100,000 through fake receipts and secret credit cards. Dad qualified for an annulment instead of a divorce, since the whole marriage was based on Linda's lies about who she was. The next morning, I went to the prosecutor's office to practice my testimony for the trial. She had me go through every single thing Kyle had done, starting from when I was 10 years old. My voice shook when I talked about the gaslighting and the way he'd make me think I was crazy. The prosecutor kept reminding me to stay calm, no matter what Kyle said during cross-examination. She warned me he'd try to make me angry, so the jury would think I was unstable. I practiced breathing exercises and keeping my face neutral while she asked me horrible questions Kyle might ask. Then the prosecutor got a call that changed everything about the case. The jail had been recording all of Kyle's phone calls, and the judge approved a subpoena for them. We listened to hours of Kyle telling Linda exactly what to say in court and threatening witnesses who might testify against him. In one call, he laughed about making my life hell since I was 10 and said he wished he'd done worse. The prosecutor added 5 new charges, including witness tampering and conspiracy, and told me Kyle was now facing up to 30 years in prison if convicted on everything. A week later, I was at the courthouse for another pre-trial hearing when this woman I'd never seen before came running at me in the hallway screaming that I'd destroyed a good family. Security grabbed her before she could reach me, but she kept yelling about how Kyle was innocent and I was a liar who ruined everything. The prosecutor recognized her as Linda's sister and started recording on his phone while she ranted about how she'd helped Kyle hide things from the cops and how they'd get me for this. The security guards looked at each other, and one of them called for actual police while holding her arms. She realized what she'd just said and tried to backtrack, but it was too late. The cops arrested her right there for obstruction of justice, and the prosecutor added her confession to our evidence pile. That night, Dad was going through old boxes in the basement looking for some paperwork when he found a bunch of home videos from before he married Linda. He called me down, and we watched them together on his old camcorder. There I was at 10 years old, laughing and running around the backyard, helping him build a treehouse, singing stupid songs in the car. I looked so happy and confident, nothing like the scared kid I became after Linda and Kyle moved in. Dad started crying and pulled me into a hug, saying he was sorry he let them take that from me. I told him it wasn't his fault, but he shook his head and said he should have protected me better. We sat there for a while just holding each other, both of us realizing we'd lost 13 years to their manipulation. He said we should both keep going to therapy, even after the trial ended, and I agreed. 2 days later, the prosecutor called with big news. The FBI had been investigating Kyle's finances and found an overseas bank account with $40,000 from all his different scams and frauds over the years. They froze the account immediately and said the money would go to his victims as restitution. I'd get compensation for my destroyed laptop, all the therapy I'd needed, and the security system I'd had to install. It wouldn't fix what he'd done, but at least it would help with the bills that had piled up from dealing with his harassment. 3 days after that, Marcus picked me up for something he'd signed us up for without telling me. We pulled up to a gym, and he led me inside to a self-defense class. I was nervous at first, but the instructor was patient and showed me basic moves to protect myself. Learning how to break someone's grip and get away made me feel more in control than I had in months. The instructor recognized me from the news coverage, and after class, he pulled me aside. He was a retired cop and offered to teach me privately for free, said he'd seen too many victims who never got justice and wanted to help. I started going twice a week, and it helped more than I expected. Then everything went crazy. Kyle was being transported to a medical appointment when he attacked the guards. He punched one in the face and kicked another in the stomach before running. They had to call in backup and shut down 3 blocks looking for him. Someone spotted him trying to hotwire a van in a parking garage and called it in. When they caught him, he fought them too, breaking one officer's nose before they got him in cuffs. The prosecutor called me that afternoon to tell me Kyle had just added at least 10 more years to his potential sentence for attempted escape and assaulting officers. She said it showed how desperate he was because he knew he was going to lose at trial. The trial was getting close, and I spent every night going over my testimony with the prosecutor. I had nightmares about Kyle cross-examining me, twisting my words the way he always had, making me look like the bad guy again. One night, Dad found me asleep at the kitchen table at 3 in the morning, surrounded by case files and evidence photos. He gently woke me up and guided me to bed, telling me I needed to rest or I wouldn't be strong enough to face him. 4 days later, Tom had his pre-trial deposition and absolutely destroyed Kyle's version of events. He went through every single lie with dates, times, and proof that Kyle was making it all up. He had phone records, security footage, financial documents, everything lined up perfectly. The prosecutor said Tom was their star witness because he had no emotional connection to any of us, just a professional who'd uncovered the truth. That night, I slept better than I had in months, knowing that someone who didn't even know me could see through Kyle's lies so clearly. Maybe the jury would too. Then Linda's lawyer called the prosecutor with a deal. Linda would plead guilty to reduce charges and testify against Kyle in exchange for 2 years probation and mandatory counseling instead of jail time. The prosecutor agreed because Linda's testimony would nail Kyle's coffin shut. shut. That same day, Dad got the signed divorce papers in the mail. He took me out to a nice restaurant that night to celebrate the legal end of that chapter, though we both knew the emotional part would take way longer to heal. We were starting to think things were under control when Kyle found another way to get to me. His new cellmate's lawyer delivered a letter to my lawyer, supposedly from the cellmate but obviously written by Kyle. It was full of threats disguised as apologies, saying I'd regret this for the rest of my life and that he'd make sure I paid for destroying his family. The prosecutor immediately added it as evidence of continued criminal behavior and witness intimidation. The cellmate got transferred and Kyle went into solitary confinement until trial. The week before trial, I needed a break from all the preparation and stress. I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother was buried, the one person who would have stood up for me if she'd still been alive when Kyle came into our lives. I sat by her headstone and told her everything that had happened, how I'd finally stood up to him, how Dad finally saw the truth, how Kyle was going to prison for what he'd done. I felt like she would have been proud of me for not letting him win. Marcus showed up about an hour later, having figured out where I'd gone. We sat there together in peaceful silence, both of us gathering strength for what was about to come. 3 weeks later, the courthouse steps felt like a mountain as I climbed them with Dad and Marcus beside me. The security guard checked our bags while Kyle walked through ahead of us, wearing a cheap suit that didn't fit right. Inside the courtroom, potential jurors filled the benches while the judge explained the selection process. Kyle stood up immediately, shuffling through papers he'd printed from some legal website. He asked the first juror if she'd ever been in an abusive relationship. When she said yes, he demanded she be dismissed for bias. The judge sighed and explained that wasn't how it worked. Kyle kept trying to dismiss anyone who looked sympathetic, especially women, but the judge kept shutting him down. By lunch, we had 12 jurors, and Kyle had annoyed everyone in the room. The prosecutor stood for her opening statement, clicking through a presentation that showed 13 years of Kyle's crimes. She had timelines, police reports, medical records, and financial documents all organized by date. Each slide showed another pattern of abuse, fraud, or manipulation. Kyle's opening was a disaster. He rambled about being framed, accused me of jealousy, blamed the police for targeting him, and even suggested the judge was biased. Several jurors were already taking notes, and not in a good way for him. The next morning, Officer Hayes took the stand first. She walked through every piece of evidence methodically, referencing her notes for exact times and dates. Kyle tried to cross-examine her, but kept getting basic legal terms wrong. When he accused her of making things up, she calmly pulled out her body cam footage. The judge had to tell Kyle 3 times to stop interrupting her answers. Tom Briggs came next with his laptop and a whole presentation about insurance fraud. He showed charts tracking Kyle's claims across 3 states, each one following the same pattern. Kyle objected to everything, but couldn't explain why the evidence was wrong. When he claimed Tom had fabricated the documents, Tom produced certifications from 3 different forensic analysts. The jury watched Kyle's face turn red as he shuffled through his papers, looking for something that wasn't there. Day 3 started with Jessica taking the stand. She brought photos of bruises on her arms and screenshots of Kyle's threatening texts. Kyle tried to say they were just playing around, but Jessica had medical records from 2 emergency room visits. The prosecutor brought up 2 more of Kyle's ex-girlfriends who testified about similar abuse. One showed a restraining order from 2 years ago. Kyle kept objecting, but the judge overruled him every time. That night, I couldn't eat dinner. My stomach was in knots, knowing I'd testify tomorrow. Dad sat with me on the couch, not saying much, but just being there. Marcus brought me chamomile tea and put on old episodes of The Office to distract me. I practiced my breathing exercises like my therapist taught me. I kept reminding myself that I'd survived 13 years of Kyle's abuse, so I could survive one day in court. The next morning, my hands shook as I walked to the witness stand. The prosecutor started with simple questions about growing up with Kyle. I told them about my hidden shoes, my stolen guitar, the juice spilled on my homework. I showed them photos of my ruined belongings and diary entries from when I was 12. My voice cracked when I described finding my guitar gone, but I kept going. The courtroom was completely silent, except for my voice and the court reporter typing. Kyle's cross-examination started aggressive. He accused me of being jealous, of making everything up, of conspiring with everyone against him. I answered each accusation with dates, times, and witness names. When he said I was always dramatic, I listed every false accusation he'd made against me over the years. I had receipts, text messages, and recordings to back up everything. His face got redder with each piece of evidence I presented. Then Kyle lost it completely, jumping up and shouting that I'd destroyed his life over a stupid car. The judge banged his gavel and warned Kyle about his behavior. I looked him straight in the eye and said quietly that he destroyed his own life with his choices. I just stopped letting him destroy mine. The jury saw him slam his fist on the table before the bailiff stepped forward. Kyle tried to compose himself, but his mask had slipped. Day 5 brought Dad to the stand. He admitted he'd failed to protect me from Kyle and Linda's manipulation. He'd spent months going through old emails, receipts, and documents to build a timeline. He showed how Linda always took Kyle's side, how she'd gaslight me into thinking I was the problem. His voice broke when he said he still cared about Linda despite everything, which made his testimony even more powerful. Kyle tried to cross-examine him, but kept calling him Dad, which made things awkward. When Kyle accused him of choosing me over real family, Dad reminded him that I was his real family. The prosecutor had more witnesses lined up for the next week. The following Monday, Marcus took the stand with a laptop and 3 binders full of printouts. He walked the jury through months of screenshots showing Kyle's fake social media account accounts harassing me. Every threatening message, every doctored photo, every lie Kyle spread online was there in black and white. Marcus explained how he'd helped me track IP addresses back to Kyle's devices and document the timestamps proving Kyle was posting while claiming to be at work. When Kyle tried to cross-examine him, he suggested Marcus made it all up because he had feelings for me. Marcus actually laughed out loud and said he was gay and had been with his boyfriend for 2 years. The jury chuckled and Kyle's face turned red. Trial day 6 brought the biggest shock when Linda took the stand as part of her plea deal. She sat there admitting she'd helped Kyle hide evidence, lied to police, and covered for him dozens of times over the years. She told the court about incidents we didn't even know about, like when Kyle stole money from my college fund, and she helped him blame it on a banking error. She revealed he'd been planning the car accident frame-up for weeks, and she'd helped him practice his story. Kyle lost it completely, jumping up and screaming that she was a traitor and pathetic excuse for a mother. The judge banged his gavel and warned Kyle he'd be removed if he didn't sit down. Linda was crying, but kept talking, describing how Kyle manipulated her into believing I was the problem. When the prosecution finally rested, Kyle had no witnesses to call because all his friends were either arrested or refused to lie for him. His closing argument was just him ranting about a conspiracy theory where I'd supposedly orchestrated everything since we were kids. He claimed everyone from the police to his own mother was lying and only he was telling the truth. The prosecutor's closing methodically destroyed every one of Kyle's claims with evidence, timelines, and witness testimony. The jury left to deliberate and the waiting was torture. I couldn't eat or sleep, just sat at home checking my phone every 5 minutes for updates. Dad took time off work to stay with me, and Marcus brought food that sat untouched on the counter. We tried watching TV but kept switching to the news hoping for updates. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart stopped, thinking it might be the call. 6 hours later, we got word the jury had reached a verdict. Back in the courtroom, my hands were shaking as the foreman stood up. Guilty on all counts. Kyle exploded, screaming that I wouldn't get away with this, and the whole thing was rigged. 2 bailiffs had to physically drag him out while he kept shouting threats. The judge scheduled sentencing for next month, and suddenly it was over. Outside the courthouse, reporters shoved microphones in our faces asking for comments. I managed to say I hoped Kyle would get help in prison and just wanted to move forward. Dad thanked everyone who'd supported us through this nightmare. Jessica and the other witnesses who'd testified hugged me on the courthouse steps. Officer Hayes congratulated me on my courage and said justice had been served. A week later, Dad and I had our first normal dinner at home without looking over our shoulders. We talked about regular stuff like his business expanding and my plans to finally finish college. Marcus had started dating someone new and was bringing him to meet us next week. Neither of us mentioned Kyle or Linda once during the entire meal. The house felt different without that constant fear hanging over us. We were learning how to be a normal family again after 13 years of Kyle's chaos. When I went back to work, my co-workers had decorated my station with welcome back signs and flowers. Regular customers kept stopping to say they'd seen the news and were proud of me. My manager pulled me aside and gave me a raise, saying I'd shown incredible strength through everything. Life felt almost normal, except I still checked my rearview mirror constantly and double-locked all the doors at night. 3 weeks later came the sentencing hearing. The judge gave Kyle 18 years in federal prison with no possibility of early release for the first 10 years. He'd be 41 before he could even apply for parole. The judge specifically mentioned Kyle's pattern of escalating criminal behavior and complete lack of remorse as reasons for the harsh sentence. Kyle was led away in shackles, still muttering about revenge and conspiracies. 2 days after that, Linda's sister called Dad, threatening to sue us for destroying her family. Dad's lawyer sent her a cease and desist letter, along with evidence showing she'd helped Kyle launder money through her business. She backed down immediately, and we never heard from her again. Every single person who'd enabled Kyle's behavior was finally facing consequences for their choices. 3 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived from Tom with the insurance company's logo on it. Inside was a letter explaining how my evidence had helped them uncover a whole fraud ring that Kyle had been working with through some online forums. The investigation spread to 12 states and stopped millions of dollars in fake claims from going through. Tom wrote that they were setting up a scholarship fund in my name for students studying criminal justice, with the first payment covering my next semester's tuition if I wanted to pursue law school. I sat at the kitchen table staring at that letter for 20 minutes, thinking about how standing up to one bully had helped protect so many strangers I'd never meet. Dad and I started therapy together the following week, sitting in those uncomfortable chairs while the therapist helped us work through everything that had happened. She had us write down all the family traditions Kyle and Linda had ruined. Then we created new ones that were just ours. We picked Sunday morning pancakes at this little diner downtown, Thursday night movies without anyone complaining about our choices, and a beach vacation for just the two of us next month at this quiet town Dad had always wanted to visit. Marcus surprised me with a party at his apartment 2 weeks later, calling it my freedom celebration. Jessica showed up with her new boyfriend, a quiet guy who treated her like gold, and she hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. Officer Hayes stopped by after her shift with a cake that said "Justice Served" in blue frosting, and we all laughed until our sides hurt. I danced to every song, ate too much pizza, and didn't check my phone once for bad news because there wasn't any coming anymore. Dad handled selling Linda's abandoned real estate business the next month, using every penny to pay off the lawyer fees and therapy bills. He put the rest in a college fund for me, then did something I didn't expect by framing the receipt for Kyle's car damage and hanging it in his office. He said it wasn't about anger anymore, just a reminder that standing up to abuse costs something, but it's always worth paying. A month later, I started my senior year majoring in criminal justice with a psychology minor, volunteering at the domestic violence shelter on weekends. My professor, who used to prosecute cases like mine, pulled me aside after class to offer mentorship, saying she saw something special in how I'd handled my situation. The shelter coordinator asked me to share my story with the other survivors, and watching them nod along and cry and then stand a little taller made every hard day worth it. Dad joined his own support group for people who'd been with narcissists, learning about all the red flags he'd missed with Linda. He told me over our Sunday pancakes that he wasn't ready to date yet, but he was working on himself, going to the gym, reading those self-help books he used to make fun of. We had our dinners together every Sunday now, just us, talking about everything or nothing, building something new from the pieces Kyle and Linda hadn't been able to break. Jessica texted me one afternoon with a photo of an engagement ring on her finger, writing that she never would have found real love if I hadn't helped her see what Kyle really was. She said I'd saved her from years more abuse, that watching me fight back gave her the courage to leave and never look back. I realized then that standing up to Kyle had created ripples I couldn't even see, helping people I didn't know needed help. The victim notification letter came 6 weeks later, stating that Kyle had been transferred to maximum security after trying to coordinate harassment from prison through contraband phones. He'd serve his full sentence with no privileges, no early release, no chance to hurt anyone else for a very long time. I filed it in my evidence folder without reading it twice because Kyle was my past and I refused to let him touch my future. Dad and I went on our beach vacation the next month, building sandcastles like we did when I was 7, before Linda and Kyle came into our lives. He started apologizing again for not protecting me better, but I stopped him mid-sentence. We'd both survived, we'd both learned, and that was what mattered now. We watched the sunset from the pier, two people who'd been through hell but came out the other side still standing. 3 months after that, I stood in the courthouse as a victim advocate, helping a young woman named Sarah file charges against her ex-boyfriend. Her hands shook as she filled out the paperwork, and I saw myself in her scared but determined eyes. I handed her the forms and told her it gets better, that she was stronger than she knew, that choosing to fight back was the hardest part, and she'd already done it. Walking out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, my phone buzzed with Marcus asking about dinner plans, reminding me that my life was finally, completely, wonderfully mine.